nanoparticles in pharmaceutics research and their applications. And if time permits, I will be providing possible many examples of some of the works we have done for the last maybe 20 years in this particular area of nanoformulations. Um, Without any further ado, as the name implies, we'll be talking today mostly about nanoparticles. And when you talk about nanoparticles or nanoformulation or even nanomedicine was not new to this society or 21st century people. It was known to us for a long time, but we have utilized it in a different way and different forms. But we have not called them nanomedicine. We have not called them nanoparticles. But this nano was there for us for a long time. I mean, thousands and thousands of years ago. If you'll go back to Roman civilization, if you'll see all those glasses, that means used those nano gold, nano copper, and so, and also the nano formulation itself. Like if you go to the Ayurvedic medications, also when we talk about bhasmas and all those very small particles, which will be burning them and breaking them apart, and you will have mixed small particles. So this is known to us for a long time. But I'll not be talking about that context today. I'll be talking about in the context of this 21st century, how this nanoparticles has played a significant role in pharmaceutics, especially in pharmacy education and research. If we go to the next, the objective of my topic today will be, after finishing this particular lecture, these are some of the things I will be accomplishing today. We should understand the principle of this nanotechnology, on which principle it stands, recognizing the growing field of nanotechnology, especially in the area of drug delivery system design. And it will be also, the objective will be comprehend the use of liposomes as nano delivery system, because this is one of the very successful nano delivery systems that we have seen in 21st century as compared to other nano formulations we can think about. And then comprehend the use of solid lipid nanoparticles as nano delivery system. I emphasize this area because we have done many publication and work in this particular area. So I just want to emphasize that the use of solid lipid nanoparticles, and also will be emphasizing understand the use of magnetic nanoparticles in pharmacy, because that is a very growing area, and we have done some work in that particular area. And understand the applications of nanotechnology and their challenges in cancer treatment. Especially, this is one of the things I'll be narrowing my focus instead of going, because as you know, that nano delivery system or nanotechnology has been utilized in pharmaceutics in many areas. So I may be narrowing its application to cancer treatment, and the challenges we'll be discussing. And if time permits, we'll be giving some examples of those nanoformulations or nanoparticles and their use in the pharmaceutical research. Without any further ado, people go back and see what is nanotechnology is all about. According to the National Nanotechnology Initiative, which is abbreviated as NNI, nanotechnology refers to the study of structures that are about 1,000 nanometers or less. Even though it is a very narrow definition, there are some nanoparticles which have shown application even up to 500 nanometer. So, but according to NNI, when you talk about nanotechnology or nanoparticles, they talk about particles which has a diameter of near about 100 nanometer or less. A nanometer, as you all know, is near about 1 billionth of a meter in size. So that means you can well imagine what size we are talking about, which cannot be even viewed under a microscope. That means these particles have greater surface area because we make those particles from larger particles. So when you break the particles, make it smaller, as you all know, energy can neither be created nor be destroyed. It will be only transferred from one form to the other. And thus, when we are breaking this, whether it's a mechanical or electrical ways, those particles will have lots of higher surface area and also surface energy. And this surface reactivity produces changes in many of their properties. That includes electrical properties, magnetic properties, optical and biological properties. So I'll be emphasizing more on these biological properties because the physicochemical properties of the materials, because of their changes, because of their unique properties, we have utilized those in applications of pharmaceutics. So it is in this range, that means when I'm talking about small narrow range of near about below 100 nanometers, some unique properties become evident. And these unique properties which we are talking about, we take advantage of those unique properties and apply those properties for whether it is a cancer treatment or whether it is a cancer diagnosis or any other imaging and so forth. So, and also you utilize these particular properties for treating certain disease conditions. And in particular, today we'll be talking mostly on anti-cancer therapy. So let's go back again. If we revisit the real size of some of those materials or species we talk about, protozoa will have a size of near about 100,000 nanometer. A cell will be near about 10,000 nanometer in size. Bacteria near about 1,000 nanometer. Viruses can be 100 and less. Macromolecules we talk about can be of 10 nanometer in size. The DNA molecule, its width can be near about approximately 2.5 nanometer, and atoms we can talk about 0.1. So you can well imagine atom to a protozoa, the how this nanoscale, you can see that how small these nanoparticles can be. And we are talking about nanoparticles of the size of a virus, which is near about 100 nanometer or less. And more examples, if you'll go back, you'll find in real life situations, water molecules can have a size of near about less than a nanometer. RBC can have near about 1,000 nanometer. Human hair, width of that one near about 100,000 nanometer. And again, on a lighter note, you can see one of the old basketball player, if you think about his height, and that height will be near about 2160100,000 nanometer. So you can well imagine what that nanometer is. It is the tiny and tiniest things we can think about. And in that tiny form, these particles have some unique properties, and we prepare, characterize, and use those nanoparticles for some disease condition. And that we'll be discussing today. So the first part of the things I will be talking about is nanotechnology in cancer therapy. Because this is a unique area, as I have told you, that from 1986 till today, we discussed yesterday a little bit about that things about EPR effect, that we are excited when the paper was published that's saying that these nanoparticles has some unique properties that enhanced permeability and retention because of their unique properties, and also some of the physiological changes that happens in case of tumor cells or in tumor. So that unique properties can allow these particles to pass through this vasculature, which are leaky vasculature in case of a tumor cells, but in case of a normal cell, we'll be finding normal vasculature, which are tightly junctioned. So that means the nanoparticles cannot pass through those tight junctions. So nanotechnology for drug delivery in cancer treatment. In order to understand that, we have to, because as I told you before, I'll be emphasizing some of the basic concept and how nanotechnology has been utilized or going to be used in this area of pharmaceutics. So we have to understand the tumor vasculature. We have to understand the tumor interstitium, and also another challenges that we face in cancer treatment is called cellular resistance. That means the cancer resistance. So again, we talk a little bit about extravasation of nanoparticles, the vascular endothelium, and presence of tight junction. As I told you, I'll show you some pictorial things so that you can understand what is the difference between a normal vasculature versus a tumor vasculature. Then again, we'll be talking a little bit possibly if you will have those nanoparticles and presented to a cell, normal cells for a tumor cell, how this uptake into those cells can happen. Sometimes this is one of the biggest challenges we face, because these nanoparticles as such will not be differentiating any, or they don't find out the differences between a normal cells and a tumor cells. And in that situations, uptake of those nanoparticles can happen to any of the cells. So that means which can cause the destruction of the normal cells. Therefore, we as a pharmaceutical scientist, we should know how we can be able to target these cells to tumor cells rather than to the normal cells, to reduce down the toxicity and enhancing the efficacy of this delivery system. Then finally, we possibly give, if time permits, I'll be giving you some use of some nanotechnology to treat some of the cancer or other disease conditions as case studies. Hopefully, I'm going with the right pace. If anybody has any questions, they can always put in a chat box. I will be checking my chat box. Okay, so we don't have anything in the chat box yet. So nanotechnology for drug delivery and cancer treatment. As you can see this figure or picture here, you'll see the left side, we are talking about traditional treatment. Most of the traditional treatment, when you are giving any drugs or drug delivery systems or any toxins or whatever things we are presenting, these particular material or the delivery system or dosage forms will be coming in contact with either to normal cells or to cancer cells. So when they cannot differentiate between those two. So that's whenever in a normal treatment, when you, even though you are putting the drug or the nanoparticles, there would be no differentiation. So you'll see that by the treatment, you'll see the dead cancer cells will happen, and also the non-cancer cells will also be dead. The normal cells will be also killed. And that causes lots of toxicity because these drugs are known to be highly toxic in nature. Whereas in case of nanotechnology, what we can do, we can even modify the surface properties of these nanoparticles so that we can target them to the tumor cells. And this is another area where lots of work has been done, how to surface modify or how to put some materials on the surface of these things, whether it is an antibody or some of the peptides or any other materials which are overexpressed in case of cancer cells, but it's not produced in normal cells. So in that way, and that type of transport or the delivery will be called active transport or active deliveries rather. So in that active delivery, what you can do is you can only target the cancer cells, whereas the non-cancerous cells or the normal cells will not be affected. So what the advantage of this treatment will be? It will be reduced down the toxicity. That means even though you are administering the nanoparticles which has been modified so that it will be targeting particularly some of the cells, so it will be more effective as well as it will be reducing down the toxicity to the normal cells. So this is the improving cancer treatment by nanotechnology, by surface modification and other ways, so that we can target it more properly to our advantage. So we can get better therapeutic targets and also better efficacy and less toxicity. So another areas where nanotechnology or many of those cancer delivery systems are targeted is considering about three important things, is as we talked about, the tumor vasculature, and also not only tumor vasculature, also the tumor environment. As we know, the tumor is a fast growing cells, and when there is a fast growing, just like we do exercise, and when we do more exercise, as you know, that will produce lots of lactic acid, glycolic acid. So during that process, because of the production of those type of acids, so the microenvironment becomes more acidic, and we take advantage of that microenvironment also. I may not be going into that area, but I just want to make sure tumor vasculature, tumor interstitium, and cellular resistance is not the only things we consider in tumor treatment, but there are so many other areas we also take advantage to target those moiety by nano formulations. So in this particular tumor cells and their environment, I'll be talking about tumor vasculature, tumor interstitium, and cellular resistance. Let's talk one by one. Let's talk about the tumor vasculature. This is the first part of this slide, is a tumor vasculature for a normal cells, but this is on the bottom in the B. A is a normal tissue, B is a tumor tissue. As you can see, the difference between those two, and there the vasculature in case of a tumor cell is leaky vasculature as compared to the tight junctions in case of the normal cells. So in case of a normal, another important things to notice in the normal tissues versus the cancerous or tumor tissues, that besides this vasculature, also lymphatic vessels are present in those case of normal cells, but this lymphatic drainage is absent in case of the tumor cells. Those two important things has led to the most important things we talked about, which is called EPR effect. That means extra permeation and retention. Let me talk about what do we mean by that. So whenever you are giving a nanoparticle within a range of 100 nanometers or less by a IV route, so it is going through the normal vasculature, the blood vessels. As you can see, they will be circulated in the normal circulation, because they will not be able to pass the normal vasculature because there is no leakage. Those particles will be just like circulated. But in case of a tumor cell, what happens is, if you will be injecting that particular nanoparticulate formulation, in this particular tumor case, the vasculature is leaky. As you can see, that the sizes of the gaps of this leaky vasculature is around 100 nanometer to 780 nanometer. Whereas in case of a normal cell, these endothelial junctions of normal cells is around 5 to 10. So since these are only 10 nanometer, these 100 nanometer particles cannot pass through those junctions. Whereas in this particular case of a leaky vasculature, in case of a tumor, these particles can easily pass through, and they will go to the tumor tissue. But once they get into the tumor tissue, the second thing that happens is, because since there is no lymphatic drainage from these tissues, those particles that went to the tumor will stay in the tumor for a long time because they cannot be drained out. So That leads to that very important concept of EPR effect that I have written down here is called EPR effect, extra permeability and retention. So, and this extra permeability and retention, the work of the some of those Japanese scientists actually was very exciting in 1986. And even in some of those papers, you'll see that they have written that we find the magic bullet to treat tumors or cancer. Everybody was excited. But unfortunately, this EPR effect was finally, when we did lots of work in that particular area with different tissues, we found that EPR effect is not universal. It happens in some cases, it doesn't happen in all tumors. Okay, so therefore, this is another biggest challenge that the scientist or the 21st century scientist or formulation scientists are facing right now. The next part of these things, as I was talking about, the tumor interstitium. That means because of the composed of collagen networks, high interstitial pressure because of those fluid can leak from the tumor vessels into the interstitium. And when there is a fluid leakage, as you can see in the structure here, you will be finding lots of pressure there. Tumors, because there is no well-defined lymphatic particles gaining interstitial access of enhanced permeation retention, and they will stay there and they will have their effect. Okay, so that what happens in the cell and what happens in the interstitium of those tumor tissues. The third challenge that we also face is the cellular resistance. Let me check my chart box here. Sir, will EPR effect can lead to accumulation in body? I'll be answering those questions, great questions. How could you minimize the toxicity of nanoparticles? That is a different issues. We'll be talking a little bit possible later. Let us finish my part of the story, and possibly I will come back and discuss about. And if I forgot anything, please remind me, and I'll come back to those questions. And those are great questions, though. Please send your questions as much as you can. So in case of a cellular resistance, as you can see the picture here, okay, a variety of drug resistance mechanism that exist. I'm just giving one of them, a mechanism here. One of the mechanism, the presence of the membrane-bound P-glycoprotein or PGP glycoproteins, either in the apical side or vasolateral in case of GI and other tissues, or the vessels or the surface, and may also present on the nuclear membrane inside the cell. Entrapment in the cytoplasmic vesicles also, like what this slide talks about, what is basically a efflux pump mechanism is all about, is whenever the drug is given or released into the cells, then this particularly the particles, nanoparticles or drugs, they will be coming down into the cell. But as soon as, if there is a presence of this efflux pump, as you can see here, and this pump, these are on the surface, what they will be doing is they will be pumping out the drug which are supposed to go to the cell, but they will be pumping outside the cell. And this efflux mechanism causes lots of resistance. Even though we are giving the drug, there is no drug going to the cells because efflux mechanism is throwing them, whether it's a PGP glycoprotein or MDR or what. So they are throwing them out just like a pump. So in this particular case, then how to accomplish that means our objective is to send these nanoparticles or the drugs to the cell, not to the outside the cell. So what we can do as you can as it has been shown in the right hand side, you can have some PGP blockers. So you can have some, you can block them. Just think about a gatekeeper and there is a security guard standing in front of the gate. Even though you want in, but he's forcing you out. The only way you can get in, if you can tie his hands or their hands, if there are more than one gatekeepers there, if you can tie their hands, you can easily get into that gate. That is the same mechanism we use to get rid of the cellular resistance, especially if it is a PGP, efflux pump mechanism. So there are many inhibitors available, and you can apply the inhibitor once the inhibitor is given. So that means the PGP pump cannot work. So all the drugs will be pumped inside the cells. That's what we want. Let's go to the next thing. So we'll talk about extravasation of nano particles. And this is also sometimes we used in the treatment of magnetic nanoparticles and or any other particles. Most endothelials, as I told you before, we have discussed this one, but this is again a simple manipulation of the previous schematic representation. Most endothelium is continuous, whereas in case of that in case of your tumor cells, it is not continuous. There will be some leakage, and those leakage will be causing these nanoparticles to passing through. And whereas in case of a normal cells, it cannot happen. So most endothelium is continuous, has tight junctions between the endothelial cells and the underlying basement membrane, but paracellular route of exit from the circulation possible can happen also. So this is another possibility. The paracellular route of exit of the nanoparticles can also happen in case of tumors. So you can see besides EPR, we can have a paracellular route of exit of these nanoparticles also. Let's talk a little bit about uptake of the cells, because this is one of the techniques or one of the area people talk about cellular uptake of nanoparticles, because all the papers you'll be seeing, people will be doing those experiment to show how much the cellular uptake of the drug is, how much cellular uptake of the nanoparticle is, how putting this drug in a nanoparticle cellular uptake is increased or decreased or minimized. So uptake into cell is mostly happen, partitioning across cell is not possible in this particular case, especially when you're talking, when you're talking about nanoparticle. It doesn't happen by passive diffusion. So the uptake mostly happens by endocytosis. I don't want to go into details. This picture gives a great example of what endocytosis, how that will be endocytes, and it goes to endosomes, and again passing through all the stages, and the therapeutic agents can be released, and again recycling on endosomes can happen, and so forth. So mechanism of endocytosis can happen in two mechanisms, by Claflin route or Chiavioli route. So those two things that we can show in the next picture. So direct intact into cytoplasm is recently reported for nanoparticles up to even 500 nanometer, and especially strongly positively charged particles are shown an interest, and therefore cationic liposomal nanoparticles are of much interest to some tumor targeting. Again, as you can see, this is a picture of cellular uptake, and by co-localizations of different type of rhodamine PLGA nanoparticles, which are endosized, and also we have different markers here to show that by which mechanism they are taken up by the cell, In case of A, it will be by Cabolin, and B by Clathrin route. So this is a schematic. This is a real picture of how those nanoparticulate formulation are taken up by the cells. Let me talk about, since we are talking about nanoparticles in clinical use, especially in cancer treatment, you will be finding, unfortunately, not too much, even though this nanotechnology or nanoparticles research has started from a long time. But unfortunately, we don't have that many drugs or formulation in the market that utilizes nanotechnology. I'm not saying that not that many, but there are only limited number of formulations in the market. And will possibly, if time permits, I'll be discussing why not. Why, with that many papers published in this particular area of nanoparticle formulation, nanomedicine, thousands and thousands of paper, but why we have few medications available in the market? What are the challenges? So if time permits, we may discuss that one as case studies. So next slide, this slide talks about some of the nanoparticulate formulations that are available in clinical practice, especially in cancer treatment. And for example, these are some of the FDA approved drugs, pegylated liposomes like Donojoms, Doxil, which is again doxorubicin, which is an anti-cancer agent, non-pegylated liposomes like Mycosat, and albumin-bound paclitaxel abraxane is another example of nanoparticulate. But besides this, there are few more nanoparticulate formulation. One of the greatest use of nanoformulation right now for humanity, as you can see, is the mRNA vaccine, which utilizes nanoparticulate lipid carriers as a vehicle for putting that mRNA vaccine. Nanotoxicology and challenges of nanomedicine. Somebody asked this question: what are the nanotoxicology and challenges of nanomedicine? It is not known too much. Not too much work has been done in the area of nanotoxicology. Actually, this is a great area of research of the future. Non-biodegradable nanoparticles, intracellular accumulation, may stimulate free radical release, inflammation, cell damage. It can may cause accumulation into lysosomal compartment, lysosomal toxicity. So there are many challenges of this nanotoxicology. And somebody asked this very important question, and this slide will give some indication which area nanotoxicology research is needed. Liver uptake of administered nanoparticles may cause liver toxicity, accumulation in spleen, gut, bone marrow, brain has been reported. Inability to be delivered by a pulmonary route to alveolar regions of the lungs is another challenge. And the reason is very simple. Why we cannot inhale nanoparticle, even though you will find there are some nanoparticulate inhalation delivery system for nanoparticles. But if you really think about the pulmonary route, in order to send the particles, the aerodynamics properties of the particle is very important. And if you will calculate the aerodynamic diameter, approximately 5 micron particles are necessary. If you will aerosolize them, they will go directly to the alveolar region and deliver the drugs, not the nanoparticles, because their aerodynamics is so low, they will be exhaled out when you will be inhaling those particles. But there are some newer techniques people have utilized with different carriers. These nanoparticles, once the carrier will be going, they will be breaking apart, they will be releasing the nanoparticles. So many work has been done in this particular area. So in summary, Nanoparticles, nanoparticle technology and development for cancer chemotherapy delivery is a continuing uh, area of research, and it will expand for many, many more years to come. The search for new tumor targets, novel ligands, new strategy for targeting and particle stabilization has advanced our ability to improve delivery at tumor level while decreasing the toxicity. So we have able to actually put some, we have reduced down the toxicity of this anti-cancer agent. That's no brainer. And but the challenge still we have is targeting. We are not able to target to all the tumors of the body in a human system. While oncology therapeutic drug delivery has been the focus of this discussion, nanoparticles have been more capabilities, including in imaging, sensing, diagnostic, targeting, radiotherapy, and transport of genetic materials. As as I have mentioned a little bit about that mRNA vaccine. Our current knowledge about nanoparticles indicates which areas are of concern, and these areas deserve future investigation to understand the behavior and toxicity of nanoparticles and for their safer development. Unfortunately, we don't have any guidelines, whether from EPA or from FDA, regarding the toxicological effects of these nano delivery systems or nanoparticles. This will be a next generation growing area of research where we have to find out, especially for regulatory affairs, because there are so many new nano formulations are going to be coming into the market possibly, and therefore the toxicity, their studies, and their behavior and their accumulation uh, is paramount importance to a formulation scientist. And I think next few years we'll be seeing more and more research in this particular area of toxicity evaluation. The next few slides I'll be talking about what are the things that's been done so far in the, since I'm talking about the US perspective. I just want to tell that lots of money has been given to national nanotechnology initiatives, not only to one department, not only NIH or National Science Foundation, but many of the organizations you can talk about, whether Department of Defense, you talk about FDA, you are Department of Agriculture, Department of Education, you name it. You can see there is a national nanotechnology initiatives that will be actually there are program among 25 federal agencies, and 15 of which have specific nanotechnological budgets that come together to do research to enhance this nanotechnology to the next generation, to the next stage. Such collaborative effect, one of the examples I can cite is NIST. They have introduced this National Institute, and where that centers, that sources of nanomaterials can be prepared, characterized, and also utilized in vivo and in vitro study. And this is the national, the nanotechnology characterization laboratory and this is funded both by NIH and Food and Drugs Administrations. And their objectives are three important areas they work on: development of therapeutics, utilizing nanotechnology, diagnosis, and also for the detection of many different types of disease conditions. And again, the sources of nanomaterials can come from any of the NCI, NIH, NSF, Department of Defense, or Department of Education, or from universities. We can send sample from, that means academia or big pharmaceutical industry. So we can send the samples there they will be able to help you in characterization, in vitro evaluation, as well as in vivo evaluation. So the next slide will be talking about the nanotechnology for drug delivery. Okay, and this this is a schematic representation I just borrowed from my book on pharmaceutics. So this nanotechnology in medicine will be considering all these aspects or all these nano materials or nano carriers we can talk about. It is not only one, it can be liposomes or liposomes, whatever you how you pronounce it. It can be dendrimers. It can be super paramagnetic iron oxide nanoparticles. It can be solid lipid nanoparticles with surface modification or pegylation. It can be nanocapsule. It can be nanosphere. It can be polymer conjugate, but and also it can be polymer micelles. So nano formulation can be any of those pharmaceutics materials or pharmaceutically designed dosage forms you can make, which can be also made in nano sizes and will have different advantages. So you as a formulation scientist or a pharmaceutics guy, you can think for this particular treatment option, which type of nano delivery system will be ideal for me. I'll just give you a simple example. If you have two drugs to be delivered, and one drug is hydrophilic, the other one is hydrophobic, it is practically impossible to put them in solid lipid nanoparticles. Solid lipid nanoparticles will not be entrapping that much of your hydrophilic material. But in case of maybe with a liposomal formulation, since you have both the aqueous core and you have a lipid membrane, so you can put maybe possibly the lipid or the hydrophobic drug in the lipid membrane, and the hydrophilic drug will be going in the core of the material. So depending on what you want to achieve, what you want to target, for example, if you want to target, you want to achieve a stealth property. Let me talk about what is a stealth property. Once you give this particular, you are injecting this nanoparticulate formulation, this nanoparticulate formulation will be engulfed by many macrophages and other materials present in the blood, and it will be sometimes excreted depending on the particle size by reticuloendothelial system and so forth. But our objective is to keep these particles circulating for longer time. In order to achieve that, we need stealth properties. Stealth properties, that means we have to modify these nanoparticles with some surface modification, so that when you will be doing the surface modification, these nanoparticles will not be engulfed by your macrophages. So it will be circulating in your blood circulation for longer time. And one of the simplest and easiest surface modifier we used for the stealth properties is PEG, or polyethylene glycol, and that process is called pegylation. So the next things we'll be talking about nano delivery systems development. And in this particular things, as you can see on the left hand side, the nanoparticles sizes, as you can going from a virus of 100 nanometers to platelet, to the red blood cells, to the capillary, which are that diameter is much more higher. And you can have these nanoparticles. It can be a vesicle, it can be a micelle, it can be dendrimers, it can be solid lipid nanoparticles, or it can be a quantum dot. So we have versatile nano formulations available or at our disposal. So we, as a formulation scientist, with our basic knowledge of the physicochemical properties of the drug and the tumor environment and tumor physiology, we can design a drug delivery system which will be targeting nano delivery system, which will be targeting to this particular tumor that will lead. So Let me talk some of the examples, and I may have to go a little bit faster because, as you know, the time is going away from us. Please stop me if I'm going over time. Uh, so solid lipid nanoparticle is a this is the area we have done lots of work in this particular area of solid lipid nanoparticle. And solid lipid nanoparticle, as the name implies, are nanoparticles which are sizes which you can make them from 10 to 1000 nanometer in sizes. They have a lipid core, and the lipid core maybe include triglyceride, diglyceride, monoglyceride, fatty acids, steroids, and waxes. And the lipid core is stabilized by the presence of a surfactant. And the solid lipid nanoparticles, as you can see, you can make is as a microcapsules, or can be a just like microdispersions, or it can be having a you can see in this particular picture I'm showing iron oxide nanoparticles, which will be again surface modified. You can have also you can coat those things, you can put them in solid lipid nanoparticles. So this is the spherical picture here, the colored sphere is a drug, whereas this is the hydrophilic groups we are talking about, which this hydrophilic group is coming from your lipid. As you know, the lipid has a hydrophobic group and as well as a hydrophilic group. So the advantage of SLN is such. I'm not going through all the details. It's all there for your slides. Use of physiological lipids, so it can be more compatible. Wide application, you can use in dermal, oral, intravenous. Improve bioavailability, protection of sensitive drugs can happen, and protection from light. Incorporation of poorly water-soluble drug in the solid, and you can do the surface modification for stealth properties and so forth. But it has some disadvantages too. Particle growth with time. This is a big challenge. Unpredictable gelation tendency of these solids because these are waxy materials and lipids. Unexpected dynamics of polymorphic transition, because as you know, these lipids can undergo polymorphic transition in the solid state. Inherent low incorporation rate of due to crystalline structure of the solid lipid. This is a big challenge. You cannot put too much drug there because it is crystalline solid, so that since it's present in solid form, you cannot have that much of drug entrapment there. So now to improve this low drug incorporation, people have utilized NLC, which is it can be overcome by all loaded solid lipid nanoparticles, also described as nanostructured lipid carriers. So you can have some oil or liquid so that you can have more entrapment inside the solid lipid nanoparticles. One of the solid nanoparticles we have patented, and we have we call it nano, and this is a trademark which was given from the United States trademark office to us. You can see a atomic force microscopy picture of this solid lipid nanoparticles we have utilized for treatment of breast cancer, and we have a patent on this particular thing. And this, as you can see, this patent talks about paclitaxel solid lipid nanoparticles for targeted delivery of breast cancer. And the lipid we have utilized in this particular case is glycerin monooleate, and we have utilized also another polymer, which is the chitin or chitosan, for making these solid lipid nanoparticles for the treatment of breast cancer, utilizing paclitaxel as the drug. Again, dendrimers is another area. Lots of research has gone in this particular area. Dendrimers are defined as synthetic macromolecules characterized by high branching points, three-dimensional globular shape, and they're very monodisperse and with a nano size. Two important things: very monodisperse. That means polydispersity is very narrow. That means they are monodisperse. That's same diameter. The expression dendrimer is derived from the Greek word dendrons, that means tree. I don't want to go into details. And they are nanoscopic in size, narrow polydispersity index, excellent control over molecular structure, availability of multiple functional groups at the periphery and cavities in the interior helps in modifying as well as drug entrapping. And some of the examples are PAMAM, that polyamido amine, PPI, polypropyl imine, and also PEI, polyethylene imine. These are some of the dendrimers are currently utilized or used, or some of the drug delivery systems has been already documented. Dendrimers are synthesized from a central polyfunctional core by repeated addition of monomers. We add monomers to enhance the sizes and so forth. So dendrimers are globular, can be 1 to 1000 nanometer in size and macromolecules with a particular architecture, and consist of 3 domains. So what are those 3 domains in case of dendrimers? As you can see, I can show you in the picture. A core at the center consisting of an atom or molecule having at least 2 identical chemical functions. Branches emerging from the core and just like a tree constituted the repeat units having at least 1 branch junction, whose repetition is organized in a geometrical progression that results in series of radially concentric layers. And we call those concentric layers as generation, first generation, second generation, third generation, and so forth. Many terminal functional groups generally located at the surface of the dendrimer architects. These surface groups can be very vital in determining the properties of this dendrimeric macromolecules. So, example, I have given a picture here. As you can see, general structure of a dendrimer, core, then branches, first, second, and third generation. And you can see there are some void spaces, and this void spaces room for molecular cargo. That means you can incorporate drug into those cargoes or into those spaces. Surface group, as you can see, the G on the outside, we are showing these are surface groups. You can modify those surface groups that can be used for targeting. Small molecules, nanoparticles, other dendrimeric and polymeric materials can be incorporated into the core. And so again, as you can see, generation G1, G2, G3, I'm showing it's exactly the same thing. This is shown in a geometric way, in a schematic way. Therapeutic applications of dendrimers in different areas. People have utilized in topical formulation, in solubilization, transdermal drug delivery, oral drug delivery, ocular drug for the eyes, pulmonary delivery, and also gene delivery for some diagnostic targeted delivery. And I have given you some examples of each of those applications. If anybody's interested, they can find out from this. And I have also listed some of the products in the market that will be, which are not with dendrimers, but these are with polymeric micelles. And also I have given you the other things I'm going to talk. Since time is short, we have to go a little bit faster because we have finished near about 1 hour of time. As I promised, I'll be finishing with 1 hour, 15 minutes, and then we'll be waiting for question and answer. This is again an area of nanoemulsions, and you know that it is similar as emulsion. You have water, you have a oil and water doesn't mix well. You have to have a surfactant, but when you put the surfactant, there will be orientation of the surfactant onto the surface. Then you'll put a sear, and when you will put a sear, it will be breaking down those particles so that this surfactant will be forming a coat surrounding those oil particles, so that whenever they will be coming together, they will be thermodynamically stable. And one of the things I want to tell here in this particular thing, the Taylor equation. As you can see, this is the Taylor equation, which talks about what type of, how much shear we have to do so that we can get a particle size of 100 nanometer. So you can calculate by using this Taylor equation that the how much shear, and the only way you can make nanoparticles or nanoemulsions by utilizing a shear of a particular strength, and that can only be achieved not by a mechanical stirrer, but you have to utilize a ultrasonic heater or something like, or fluidized or micro fluidized system. Some of the examples I'm giving, some of the oils and surfactants which are used mostly in nanoemulsions. Some of the natural oil, sesame, castor, soybean, paraffin oil, which is not a natural oil, lanolin, glycerin monostearate, linseed oil. These are all has been tested as nanosuspension. Surfactant they have used starting from natural lecithin to poloxamol and polysorbate and so forth. They have also added other additives because we are using lots of oil. There will be lots of oxidation. So antioxidants are mostly used. Complexing agents, methyl paraben and propyl paraben are used as preservatives and so forth. So some of the commercially available nanoemulsions are listed here. I don't want to go into details. I've given it their manufacturers and their indications, and also the brand name in the market. Coming back to, again, nanosuspension, you can make exactly the same way in the nanosuspension, but in case of a nanosuspension, we are not dispersing a liquid into a liquid, rather than you are suspending a solid to a liquid, and we are breaking those solid into smaller particles by utilizing, again, shear, and that shear can be ball mill and other mills which can be breaking those particles to a smaller particles to give nano size. This is again the other area are polymer conjugates. You will be finding lots of area of research in this particular area where we have a polymer, the drug will be attached to with a linker, and you have a targeting moiety also, and you also a solubilizing group which will be helping to help this polymer conjugate. There are some polymer conjugates, as you can see, year to market, and some of the polymer conjugates you will be finding in the market and manufactured by many companies, starting from Pfizer, Amazon, Roche, and so many other pharmaceutical companies. This area, liposomes, recently we are working in many liposomal delivery systems, and this is one of the area where most of the drugs are available as nano formulations are available in the commercial market. And liposomal formulation, as the name implies, it consists of mostly lipid molecules. So lipid molecules, as you know, that has, and these are phospholipids or these are natural lipids, so that they are more biocompatible. Whenever these lipids are exposed in water, they will be forming the vesicles, and that is called a liposomal formulation. So in a lipid, we have hydrophilic and hydrophobic groups. I think most of you guys know, and when we'll be exposing this material in an environment like water or buffer, it will be forming a vesicle, and that vesicle can be entrapping the drug. And these are the conventional liposomes, as you can, surface modified stealth liposomes. We can have peptides or antibody on the surface of the liposomes that can be used for targeted. We can make some cationic liposome. So liposome can also be changed in depending on our need. So that is the versatility the liposome has. So we can have stealth properties, you have targeted properties, you can cationic liposomes, and also you can just have conventional liposomes. And liposomes can be of different unilamellar, multilamellar, large unilamellar, and multivesicular. So basically you can see that you can uni versus multi, so the particle size can be changing from nano to the micro ranges. So you can make this liposomal particles any sizes you want, utilizing different techniques. And I'll be showing a little bit here those techniques, how to make those liposomal particles with the different sizes. Some of the liposomes we make by, you can make it liposome preparations by MLV, multilamellar vesicles, unilamellar vesicles, large unilamellar vesicles, or giant unilamellar vesicles. This can be used by thin film method. People use by organic dissolution processes. You'll make the film, take the film, disperse them into a aqueous environment, and you'll be forming the vesicles, and you'll lyophilize those processes. You'll get a multilamellar, and then you can take this particular multilamellar vesicle and utilize this, all these techniques. You can get unilamellar. If you want to get large unilamellar, you can do fridge thawing, you can do bath probe sonication, you can do extrusion, high pressure homogenization. So these are some of the techniques people use to make multilamellar vesicles to unilamellar vesicles. And you can make also unilamellar vesicles to large unilamellar by fridge thawing, cycling them through extruders too. Okay. So this is one simple example of forming a minocycline, which is antibiotic loaded liposomal formulations. You know, you dissolve them in a lipid things, do evaporation, forming a thin film, taking this thin film and then reconstituting with your phosphate buffer, and then you are getting large multilamellar vesicles. And again, you take this large multilamellar vesicles, passes through extrusion by many cycles. You may get larger, then become smaller and smaller, and then you will get small unilamellar vesicles, and maybe you can purify them. Purification can be done by many methods, by chromatographic separation and so forth. And finally, after gel permeation chromatography or chromatographic separations, you can freeze dry those products and utilize for your research. Some of the liposomal formulation, as I told, many liposomes has been prepared, and their applications in different disease conditions are listed here. This is the last area I'll be putting or discussing a little bit. Some newer area, it's maybe newer area for us, but maybe for others, it may be one of the oldest area. This is the called magnetic nanoparticle delivery system and their applications in cancer therapy. So in order to understand this, we have to know these magnetic nanoparticles can have paramagnetic properties, it can have ferromagnetic properties, it can have super paramagnetic properties. And when we are talking about, when we are applying a field, and that's magnetization M and H, and you can see the ferromagnetic particles, as you can see in the dash line, are not the ideal one for application in cancer therapy. The reason is they produce a hysteresis loop, or in other words, if you just stop magnetizations, still there will be in the body, there will be some magnetization, even though you have stopped the field, okay, because of this hysteresis loop. But whereas in case of a super paramagnetic, as you can see that you stop it, again, it will be coming back to the same because they don't have hysteresis loop. And same thing is with paramagnetic material. So super paramagnetic materials are mostly the ideal one for this therapy. When I'm talking about this therapy, I'm talking about either targeting therapy or hyperthermia. Hypothermia is a technique we use, and we have done lots of work in this particular area, that how these super paramagnetic materials or nanoparticles can be embedded in solid lipid nanoparticles and can be given to lung cancer therapy. Okay, and the idea is like this: you can put these nanoparticles in the microparticles. The particle size is near about, the aerodynamics particle size is 5 micron. If you'll aerosolize those particles, it will go to the alveolar region and where the tumor resides in case of a lung cancer. And once, since you have a drug there, it will be reducing the drug size or the tumor size to 3 millimeter or less. Because if the tumor size is more than 3 millimeter, you cannot apply a heat, and that heat application is not going to be any have therapeutic value. So you have to first reduce the tumor size to 3 millimeter. That can be only done by some anti-cancer agent. Once the anti-cancer agent is active and reducing down the your size of the tumor to 3 millimeter or less, at that time you can apply a magnetic field or even so some other stimulator from outside external sources. So that will be enhancing, or that will be increasing the temperature of these nanoparticles in the tumor, because they are residing in the tumor. The temperature is increased, and it will be destroying depending on what type of temperature we are achieving. And in this particular case, you can determine the temperature of super paramagnetic particles. In case of ferromagnetic particles, we have to find out the entire loop. That means for a ferromagnetic particle, all the heat generated when you apply this magnetic field can be determined amount per unit volume of the ferromagnetic particle by frequency as well as the area of the hysteresis loop. But in case of a super paramagnetic, only we have to determine the heat generation is obtained from the frequency factor, especially the susceptibility parameter, which is the X double prime. As you know, the susceptibility, I'm not going into details about the susceptibility parameter of a super paramagnetic particles. And if you can find out this, the temperature or the amount of heat generated will be depending on the frequency as well as all this X prime, which is helps us to find out the total amount of heat that will be generated. Just one very important things to remember at this point. I just want to, there are two different types of temperature we are talking about.